It has not been easy for me. And, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I came into Manhattan.
Have you ever heard someone complain about losing a diamond earring in the ocean? Not because it was sentimental, not because it was the only thing they owned, but because it was just annoying. Now, imagine that happening and whether their paycheck will stretch to the end of the month. There's a strange moment that happens sometimes. A moment where someone incredibly wealthy says something completely serious, and you just pause, you blink, and you think, wait, did they really just say that? It's not always malicious. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's just so disconnected from reality that it feels like they're living on another planet. And the wildest part? Most of them genuinely don't see the problem. Today, we're diving into moments where extreme wealth created extreme blind spots. The kinds of comments that made millions of people collectively roll their eyes. Some are awkward, some are absurd, and a few are so tone deaf you almost can't believe they actually happened. Let's start with one that might sound familiar. 10. A small loan of $1 million. Someone looks you straight in the eye and says, "My life wasn't easy. I had to start with just a small loan of $1 million. A small loan, $1 million. That's exactly what Donald Trump said during a 2015 town hall while talking about how he built his real estate empire. Now, most people hear loan and think student debt, car payments, maybe borrowing a few thousand from family, not 7 figures handed over as a starter pack. Trump framed it as proof that he had to grind his way up, that he had it tough. But here's the thing. When you grow up in a 23-room mansion, receive a yearly allowance worth hundreds of thousands in today's money, and are already financially insulated from failure, calling $1 million small hits differently. To the average person, that's life-changing money. To him, it was just the beginning, and that's where the disconnect shows. It's not even about the number itself, it's the framing. The idea that starting with $1 million safety net somehow counts as struggle. When you know that even if you fail, you'll still land on marble floors instead of concrete. That's not exactly the same game. But from his perspective, it probably felt normal. The self-made billionaire celebration. In 2019, Forbes declared Kylie Jenner the youngest self-made billionaire. Self-made. That word sparked debate instantly. Because yes, she built a cosmetics brand, but she also grew up in one of the most famous and financially powerful families in entertainment history. The brand had instant exposure, built-in marketing, global visibility from day one. Still, the billionaire title stuck, at least for a while. Then things got awkward. A year later, Forbes reported that her net worth had been inflated. Documents suggested the business wasn't nearly as large as originally claimed. The billionaire status? Questioned. But before that correction, during the interview, Kylie casually mentioned that her sisters teased her for being so rich, joking that she should fund their vacations. It was meant to be lighthearted, playful. But imagine watching that while calculating whether you can afford your own vacation, or even a day off. That's the contrast. For most people, becoming financially stable takes decades, if it happens at all. For some, wealth multiplies within systems already designed to amplify their advantage. Again, it's not just about money. It's about perspective. When your biggest financial annoyance is siblings joking about how rich you are, you're living in a very different world. Just stop buying avocado toast. You've probably heard this one before. If millennials would just stop buying avocado toast and expensive coffee, they could afford houses. In 2017, Australian luxury property developer Tim Gurner went viral after suggesting that young people struggling to buy homes just needed to cut back on smashed avocado and $4 coffees. He talked about how, when he was saving for his first property, he wasn't spending money on trendy breakfasts. Fair point, until you dig a little deeper. He reportedly received a $34,000 loan from his grandfather to help jumpstart his career. Now compare that to someone saving $15 here, $20 there from skipping brunch. Student debt exists at historic levels, yet the narrative becomes, you're just spending wrong. It shifts systemic issues into personal blame, and that's what made people react. Because most young adults aren't broke because of toast. They're broke because rent eats half their income. But when you've never had to choose between groceries and gas, from inside the bubble, it probably sounded like practical advice. From outside, it felt like satire. Nobody wants to work anymore. When people complain about work ethic, it usually comes from older executives or politicians. But when Kim Kardashian said it, it hit differently. In a 2022 interview with Variety, she gave advice to women in business. Her #1 tip? Get up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days. Now on the surface, that sounds motivational. Hustle culture, grind mindset, discipline, but context matters. Kim grew up in Beverly Hills. Her father was a high-profile attorney. Her family already had financial stability and powerful connections long before reality television made them global celebrities. So when she talks about working hard, people hear something else. Because millions of women are already working. Working 2 jobs, working night shifts, working while raising kids, working while caregiving for parents, working while exhausted. The idea that the main barrier to success is simply effort feels disconnected from reality. For many, it's not about laziness. It's about access, opportunity, safety nets, and structural barriers. Hard work absolutely matters. But pretending that everyone starts from the same starting line, that's where the eye rolls begin. It's easy to preach grind when failure doesn't mean eviction. It's easy to say, just work harder, when your network alone is worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. The comment wasn't necessarily meant to insult anyone, but it revealed something. Sometimes privilege is invisible to the person who benefits from it. And when you can't see your own head start, you assume everyone else just isn't running fast enough. A soup kitchen photo op. There's nothing wrong with volunteering. In fact, leaders showing up in their communities can be powerful. But when former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak visited a soup kitchen during a filmed event, one moment stood out. Sunak, a former investment banker married into a billionaire family, was serving food to people experiencing hardship. Cameras were rolling. Everything looked carefully staged. Then he asked a man in line whether he worked in business. The man replied calmly, "I'm homeless." That single exchange captured the entire disconnect. Soup kitchens exist because people cannot afford food. They exist because individuals are unemployed, underpaid, displaced, or facing crisis. When you've lived in elite financial circles your entire adult life, stepping into extreme poverty, even temporarily, can feel like visiting another universe. The issue wasn't that he volunteered. It was that the moment revealed how distant wealth can make someone from everyday struggles. If you've never had to worry about housing, never had to choose between heating and groceries, never faced food insecurity, it's easy to underestimate how real those problems are. The exchange lasted seconds, but it spoke volumes. Farming is simple. In 2016, while speaking at Oxford University, Michael Bloomberg made comments about farming that raised eyebrows. He suggested that farming doesn't require the same level of analytical thinking as technology jobs. The implication? Farmers wouldn't easily transition into tech because the cognitive skill set is different. Now, anyone who has ever grown even a backyard garden knows it's not just tossing seeds into dirt. Farming involves weather forecasting, supply chain management, equipment maintenance, soil science, budgeting, risk assessment, market timing, and that's before sunrise. Commercial farming especially is complex. It requires understanding global commodity pricing, crop rotation science, logistics, labor management, and regulatory frameworks. It's not mindless labor. It's strategic, physical, and financial all at once. The comment exposed a broader pattern. When your career exists entirely within finance and tech, it becomes easy to undervalue industries you've never worked in. There's a tendency in elite circles to equate digital work with intelligence and manual labor with simplicity. But intelligence doesn't only exist in office towers. It exists in fields, in workshops, in kitchens, in construction sites. When someone dismisses an entire profession as less complex, it signals something deeper, not just ignorance, distance. You guys paid for this. Imagine working a warehouse shift, 10 hours on your feet, strict productivity targets, bathroom breaks timed, cameras watching performance metrics. Now imagine your boss takes a 10-minute trip to space, and when he lands, he thanks you for paying for it. Standing in a cowboy hat, smiling for the cameras, he said, I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer because you guys paid for all this. Technically, he wasn't wrong. Amazon's profits funded his ventures, but saying the quiet part out loud is different. At the time, Amazon workers had publicly discussed intense labor conditions, high quotas, physical strain, limited breaks. Many employees were earning modest wages compared to the company's soaring valuation. So hearing the world's richest man casually acknowledge that their labor financed his space hobby felt surreal. For him, it was probably meant as gratitude. For many workers, it sounded like a reminder of how the system works. Labor generates value. Ownership accumulates it. When someone at the top builds rockets while someone at the bottom struggles with rent, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The space flight lasted about 10 minutes. The optics, much longer. Sometimes the disconnect isn't hidden. Sometimes it's said directly into a microphone. And once it's out there, you can't unhear it. Guessing grocery prices. When you have more money than you could spend in several lifetimes, everyday expenses stop registering. That became obvious when Bill Gates appeared on The Ellen Show and was asked to guess grocery prices. Simple items, pizza rolls, basic supermarket stuff. He guessed $22 for a bag that cost under $10. The audience laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly. It wasn't shocking. Of course he doesn't do his own grocery shopping. Of course he doesn't compare price tags. But that's exactly the point. For most families, groceries are a weekly calculation. Is beef cheaper than chicken? Did prices go up again? Can we stretch this until payday? When you're worth tens of billions, those mental calculations disappear. Budgeting becomes abstract, inflation becomes theoretical, and everyday realities, the kind that shape how people live, slowly fade from personal experience. It doesn't mean Gates is careless or indifferent. It just shows how wealth changes awareness. If you haven't personally swiped a debit card for milk in years, you lose touch with the rhythm of regular expenses. It's not malicious, it's insulation. And insulation over time creates distance. The grocery aisle becomes just another place someone else handles. For everyone else, it's where financial decisions get made every single week. $400,000 a year is embarrassing. Motivational speakers love bold statements. But when Grant Cardone said earning $400,000 a year would be embarrassing, it struck a nerve. He claimed that if he made that amount annually, he'd feel ashamed as a husband, father, even as a human being. Let that sink in. The average American salary sits well below $100,000. Globally, it's far lower. For most households, $400,000 a year would mean no debt stress, home ownership, college funds secured, retirement planning stable, actual vacations without financial anxiety. Yet from his perspective, it wasn't enough. Now, in fairness, Cardone operates in ultra-high net worth circles. His financial benchmarks are different. But when you broadcast that statement to millions of viewers, many struggling to cross $50,000, it lands harshly. Ambition is one thing. Shaming people for not earning nearly $500,000 annually is another. It reinforces a mindset that success only counts at extreme levels. For the vast majority of people, stability itself is the goal. Not yachts, not private jets, not nine-figure portfolios, just breathing room. When you call that embarrassing, you reveal how far removed your standards have become from everyday life. Comparing the rich to victims of the Holocaust. There are tone-deaf comments, there are out-of-touch comments, and then there are comparisons that make people physically stop and stare at the screen. In 2014, venture capitalist Tom Perkins wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal reacting to criticism of the ultra-wealthy during the Occupy Wall Street movement. His argument? That rising criticism of the 1% reminded him of Nazi Germany. Specifically, he referenced Kristallnacht, the 1938 event where Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses were destroyed, and thousands of Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Let that sink in for a second. He suggested that public anger toward billionaires, higher taxes, regulatory debates, protests, was comparable to the early stages of persecution faced by Jewish people in Nazi Germany. Now, criticism of wealth concentration is not violence. Protests are not pogrom. The comparison wasn't subtle. It wasn't misquoted. He clarified his position in interviews afterward, and that's what made it so jarring. Because when you equate billionaires facing criticism with one of the most horrific episodes of targeted violence in modern history, it reveals something profound. It reveals a worldview where discomfort feels like persecution, where regulation feels like oppression, where losing a percentage point in taxation feels existential. Healthcare, student loans, or stagnant wages. Hearing a multi-millionaire frame himself as historically victimized felt not just tone-deaf, but deeply inappropriate. There's a difference between saying, "I disagree with higher taxes," and invoking historical atrocities. When wealth becomes so central to identity that criticism feels like existential threat, that's a level of insulation most people can't relate to. The backlash was immediate, because some lines just don't blur, and this one didn't. So now I've got to ask you, which moment made you pause the hardest? Was it the small $1 million loan, the avocado toast lecture, the grocery store guessing game, or comparing billionaires to victims of genocide? I want to know which one genuinely made you roll your eyes. If you enjoyed this breakdown and you like diving into the moments where power meets perspective, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that like button so more people see it. And subscribe if you want more conversations that unpack what people in power say. Because sometimes the most telling stories aren't about what the wealthy own, they're about what they don't see.